have counties, I think, in different places with their implementation of some of the measures, and that's likely to continue going forward as these different dates that Karen was talking come up. The April 1st date, for example, when the county social workers are supposed to begin fingerprinting the new recipients and recipients at the annual redetermination time. In fact, also counties have different structures just within their program integrity structures. In some counties, it's all done in the Human Services Department. They have investigators. They work with their social workers very closely and try to integrate that. In other counties, the investigation function is housed within the district attorney's office. And counties were allowed many, many years ago when this program started to structure however they wanted this part of what they do. And that's one of the reasons that you see in one county, the district attorney's office might be very, very involved. In another county, they're less involved, maybe only at a point where there is a fraud case identified that is a very large amount of money, for example. They would then forward that to the district attorney's office, but the DA wouldn't actually be involved in putting together the case or investigating. So I wanted to make it clear that there are a lot of different structures. I'm not sure I'd say there's 58 different structures, but probably there's a few models, and some counties employ each of those models. And with respect to program integrity, I think that Deborah made a really good point, and we think about program integrity at CWGA in two ways. First, of course, anti-fraud, people who are claiming hours for services not provided or not being truthful about things, either purposefully. And then there's quality assurance and questions about services should be provided, people should be safe and cared for in their homes, and how do we make sure that that is happening as well? And to the extent that you work at all with the county human services staff, I'm sure you know that just like everyone, they're pretty overworked. I think we get now, on average, about 8 hours of social work time per case per year. And that's supposed to include an intake, an annual renewal, entering in all the time card information, and then any case maintenance that would go on if someone is moving or changing providers, leaving very little time for quality assurance. And we did support the Quality Assurance Initiative a few years ago that was seeking to make the definition standard across counties, so you kind of knew what you were talking about when you were talking about someone assessed as needing so many hours or these or that type of services, but also hoping to look at components of quality assurance to make sure that people really were getting services, that they were being well cared for, and that IHSS was doing its job, that it was working for consumers and for providers as well. And so it is frustrating when we hear numbers thrown around about rampant fraud in the program. Just as Deborah said, I wouldn't say there's no fraud, but some of the numbers that are used are wildly out of proportion to reality. One of the grand jury reports that's often cited by people who think there's a lot of fraud in the program is from San Luis Obispo County, and our director in San Luis Obispo County has very publicly disavowed those numbers. The grand jury report is actually being misused, as he states, and I'd be glad to provide any information about that if folks were interested. Couple more thoughts just on these new changes. First, with respect to the April 1st changes, with the consumers will be fingerprinted and possibly have their photos taken, which actually isn't part of the law. So there's a question for us about that. We actually didn't know about the Polaroids and the ink pads until the January budget came out either, and were quite floored at the concept of the social workers going out with ink pads to do wet roll prints instead of having scanning technology that could take fingerprints like we typically use for most of our programs now. And the concept of the Polaroid cameras was rather stunning. My husband got one out of the closet that he had in case we needed it. So if anyone needs a Polaroid, I do have an extra. In discussing, I want to say one more thing about the Polaroid. So the Polaroid company does actually still exist. people to have to be trained on the use of wet roll fingerprints, confusion for clients and consumers, and just sort of general mayhem like we saw with the November 1st provider enrollment changes, which I think you're talking about elsewhere on your conference agenda. So I think also with respect to the targeted mailings and the home visits that Karen and Deborah talked about, these are not supposed to happen without the development of protocols. I want to make very clear about that, and our position is that they should not be started and should not happen without protocols being developed. And by protocols, I don't just mean how do we decide who gets a targeted mailer or who gets a home visit, but what does unannounced really mean? If there are people, for example, I spoke with a very nice woman who has an extreme chemical sensitivity, and she needs to educate people before they can come into her home about wearing perfumes and harsh chemicals that can literally make her sick. And she's pretty worried about what might happen if someone just shows up on her door and they're, drenched in aqua velva. That can make her sick. And so in addition to the issues that Deborah raised with respect to who is that on my doorstep, how do I know that they really are who they say they are, or what happens if the consumer's not at home, the provider doesn't happen to be there. It's not like this is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week program with a maximum number of hours of 283. You don't have somebody there all the time who's your provider. How is that going to be handled? These are really, really important questions that we think not just the counties and the state, but also provider groups and consumer representatives and consumers themselves should be involved in developing these so people understand them and they make sense. It just seems like kind of getting back to some common sense with some of this is a really important thing. And I guess my last point, and I did say it once already, but yes, this is the law. It may not be the law that people wanted, but it is the law, so we will be trying to work with the state and the legislature, and like I said, the advocacy groups to do it right, but we want to do it once and do it right, not to hustle things into place to meet artificial deadlines that don't make any sense for people, and really use, like I said, as much common sense as possible in doing this so people aren't intimidated or scared off the program when they are legitimately receiving services or legitimately providing services. That making sure that that's happening in a quality manner, trying to root out that small amount of fraud that's there to the extent that we can, and in a cost-effective manner is important, but it's not the end-all, be-all, it shouldn't be of the program. So I think I'll wrap it up there, and we can move on to the next speaker, and hopefully we'll have a little time left for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Michelle's going to speak next. Kathy.